The next thing I'm going to show you is how to build three-dimensional forms instead of working with single slab. So I'm going to be building this cube by taking apart my chipboard sculpture and laying each piece onto my rolled clay slab and cutting them out. Make sure you fold the tape and get it out of the way, otherwise it can get in the way when you're trying to cut your pieces out. Make sure you've rolled your slab following the tutorial video on how to properly roll a slab with your PVC pipe and using compression in your dowel rods. If you did not roll your slab following these directions, then you need to re-roll it because your slabs can crack and break without the proper compression, and you also need your slabs to be 1/4 of an inch thick throughout, and that's what your dowel rods do for you. Make sure when you're cutting out your shapes that you keep the pin tool as close to a 90-degree as you can. So straight up and down. Hold the chipboard in place so it doesn't slide when you're cutting out your shapes. Any extra slab that you have, knead it back up, smush it back together, put it right back in your bag of clay. Again, save all of your scraps. You don't want to waste your clay. Fold them up, smush them together, put them back into your bag. So I'm going to start building. And anytime you are putting two shapes together to build a three-dimensional form, you have to cut 45-degree angles into each side. So I'm holding my pin tool at roughly a 45-degree angle, and I'm cutting through each side to give me a beveled edge. This is so important. You have to bevel your edges every single time you're putting two pieces together to create what would be a corner. So because I'm building an enclosed cube, every side of every one of these is going to get a beveled edge. And you want to do that before you start to build. So that will give you nice sharp corners. That makes up for the difference in the thickness of the chipboard compared to the thickness of the clay. If you do not do beveled edges, you're going to find that you end up with a cube that is uneven. It has one side that's taller, one side that's shorter. So you have to think about it like every single time you're bringing two flat shapes together to create some kind of corner, whether it's a cube or you're building a rectangle or you're building an octagon or you're building a triangle or a pyramid, you've got to create a beveled edge. I always hold my finger or my thumb on the opposite side and pull the pin tool into my thumb or finger. That stops me from tearing the corners of the piece as I create my beveled edges. So now I'm going to score and slip. Score marks are close together, cross hatch them, so back and forth. If you do really light score marks or you have a lot of spacing or gaps in between your marks, your slab will come apart in the kiln. So I'm going to score all of the sides. And now I can start to build. A little bit of slip, stick, push together with some pressure. And then while I'm holding that wall up, I'm immediately going to slip the next side. And then these two walls can lean against each other for support. So think, how can I work so that gravity does not make my piece fall apart? So now these are leaning into each other. You can see I have 3 seams on the inside. So I'm going to roll little skinny coils And I'm going to add those into the seams. Slab construction requires an extra step to ensure that it does not fall apart. So once you've scored and slipped, you're going to take these small coils and you're going to fit them into the seams. The smaller the coil, the easier it is to actually complete this. And they don't have to be nice looking, they just have to be really small. And I'm going to use the curved part of my modeling knife to blend that coil into the upper wall and into the flat floor of this cube. A little bit of water, push that coil down, and push that coil up. Then I run my finger along it and smooth it out with some water. I can push this coil down and then push it up, and I'll tilt this towards the camera so you can see it. And I have my hand on the back of the piece for support. You always want to have something against where you're applying pressure, so it kind of is a counter support. So that's completely blended. Any little areas that I don't have blended, I can fix. And then all you have to do is pinch your corners together. Now these slabs are pretty soft, so I can pinch my corners together and I can start to smooth things, but I'm definitely going to have to wait until this piece is leather hard to do some really nice smoothing and to crisp up my edges. But I'll do what I can now. You should not have to add any extra clay on the outside of this piece. You should just be able to pinch the corners together and smooth them out. And you do not need a ton of slip, just a little bit. And I always make sure I get the slip off of my fingers before I try to smooth. I can use my metal rib. You just want to close those corners off. And because this cube is relatively small, there's no sagging that's occurring. And so my suggestion is to let each square piece stiffen a little bit before you start to build your cubes. And then that way your slabs won't sag as you're kind of rotating this around and you're smoothing it. So it's super important to cut out all of your shapes and let them sit out and let them start to dry. The smaller the shape, the faster it will dry, so you have to be very careful. Small shapes may take only an hour to get to the leather hard stage. Larger shapes may take a few hours, but you need to keep an eye on that because you can't build if these get too dry. They need to be just stiff enough that they can hold their own shape, but you can still apply some pressure and smooth the clay and it responds to that pressure. If you go to bend one of these and they're going to crack, that means you've let it dry too much. So I'll do what I can right now, and you'll see that I will have some wobbles and my edges and sides will not look super straight because the clay is still just a little bit too soft. In another video, I come back and I clean this up once it's dried out more because it's actually easier to do some of the cleaning once the clay has hit true leather hard. Now you can see I still have to fix those blended seams on the inside. So I'm going to roll a couple more coils and fill those in. Oftentimes I'll use my scraps from my beveled edges to roll my coils if they're still soft. And you want to smooth that coil out completely so that you can't see that it was a coil. If you can still see a coil there when you're done, then the coil isn't doing its job and it's not holding your walls together. You have to blend it so that it looks like two pieces become one. Now you might be thinking, okay, she has to put this top piece on. And once she puts the top piece on, there's no way she can do these blended coils because she can no longer get inside the form. And sometimes that happens. And so when I put the top piece on, it's not going to have the coils blending the seams. But so long as you do it in every area that you can possibly get to, it will help with the structural integrity of your piece. So when I put the top piece on, I'll spend a lot of time really pushing the outside corners together to make up for the fact that I wasn't able to add the blended seams on the inside. So you can see I can, with a little bit of pressure, bend this, but it holds its shape. And that's where I want it to be to put it on top. Because if it was really, really soft, it's going to sag and it's going to collapse. And there's nothing you can do to fix that except for to cut that piece off and do a new one and let it dry out. So a lot of working with slab construction is a waiting game and getting everything cut and prepared, and then building within the time frame you have once things have hit a certain level of dryness. And then also making sure you're not letting it get too dry. Because once it gets too dry, it's almost impossible to reverse that and bring it back to life in order to finish sculpting. So you've got to be very careful. And you can't rush slab or you'll end up with a really messy, collapsing sculpture. So that's as clean as that's probably going to get for now. And I'll be able to come back and fix that up later. And I'm going to vent it. So that's the bottom. And now I have a vented piece that will not blow up in the kiln.